said Gina to the staff room kettle. "You're still here, then?" The kettle turned into Tawny Bateman. "Right so," he said. "I thought Brian fired you. Mr. Dawson decided to give me another chance." "Did he now?" Gina wrinkled her nose. "Well, we all make catastrophic errors of judgment every so often, and why should Tom Dawson be any different? Just one thing, though. If I ever catch you doing something like that again, inside the office or out of it, I'll make you wish you really were a kettle. Got that?" Tony shuddered. "Loud and clear." "Splendid. And from now on, unless explicitly required to be otherwise in the line of duty, just be yourself." Her frown deepened, just a smidge. "I know. I wouldn't want to be you. God knows, it must be absolutely ghastly, but somebody's got to do it, I suppose, and it's always been standard operating practice in this firm to give the truly rotten jobs to the least valuable members of staff. Now get out of my sight before I say something hurtful." Tawny hurried to the door, hesitated, took his life in his hands and turned back. "You knew it was me?" "What? The kettle? Yes, of course." "How?" Gina sighed. "The power of the inner eye," she said. "The ability to see past the surface, right down to the subatomic level. Also, you are wearing a European plug." "Ah." "You haven't gone yet." Sorry," Tony said, and went. Alone at last, Gina looked round for the real kettle, but couldn't find it. Why could nobody ever leave things where they ought to be? She knew why. "Harmonsworth," she said. At first nothing happened. Then a drawer in the kitchen unit slid open, and there was the kettle. She took it out and put it on the worktop. "Are you in there?" she said. "Yes." "Well, come out. I want to make a cup of tea." "No." "Interesting. You're hiding, aren't you?" "Yes." Gina instinctively retreated a long pace. Say what you like about Harmonsworth, and she frequently did, but he was a supremely rational creature. If he could usefully serve his master, he did so, regardless of inconvenience, loss of dignity, or physical harm. But if he perceived danger, and there was nothing he could contribute, he hid. "Harmonsworth," Gina said. "What's going on?" No reply. Frustrating, but when Harmonsworth made his mind up to withdraw, there was very little anybody could do to make him change it. Plugging in the kettle and turning it on wouldn't help. He'd probably like that. "Is it Ted?" she asked. "Is he in trouble?" "Yes." "Bad trouble?" "Very, very, very bad." And instead of rushing to defend his master with tooth, claw, and whatever else he happened to have, a field of intense but fruitless speculation among the partners over the years, he was hiding in a kettle. "What sort of bad?" "Awful." "I see. Thank you. Sorry to have disturbed you." On the worktop, a cup of tea materialised. It was almost certainly single source Darjeeling, with just the right amount of milk and one no-calories sweetener. She materialised a yellow sticky, wrote on it, "out of order," stuck it on the kettle, and put it away in the drawer. Nuts, she thought. Now what? She took her tea back to her office and found Brian Teasdale waiting for her. "You look pleased with yourself," she said. "What have you done?" "Me? Nothing. Look, guess what? Tiamat the Destroyer's ex-husband is Santa Claus." Gina put her tea down on the desk. "That's what I like about this business," she said. "Any day of the week, people can breeze into your room and say something like that to you, and you can be pretty sure they're not raving mad or working for the National Enquirer. It certainly beats working in road haulage." "You what?" "Tiamat the Destroyer," Brian said. "The woman with the hats and the Gainsborough paintings." "Yes, I know all that." "Santa?" "Yup." "Santa Claus. Fat man with a beard. Chimneys. Reindeer." "The very same. And Tom Dawson knows him, and he's going to talk to him, and everything's going to be fine." "Oh dear." "Brian," she said gently, "don't get your hopes up. I just found Harmondsworth in the staff room, hiding in a kettle. Mr. Teasdale frowned. Oh, quite. From which I deduce that Tom had his chat with Santa, and it didn't go well, or something like that. Anyhow, things have probably moved on since you got cheerful. Sorry. Mr. Teasdale sagged. I don't understand. What could possibly have gone wrong? I suggest you ask Tom? I suppose so. Over the years, Pity had got Gina into more trouble than she cared to remember. On the other hand, he looked so miserable. Or I could ask him for you, she heard herself say, before she had a chance to bite her tongue off at the root. Could you? Thanks. You can talk to him much better than I can. Which was a statement of fact, after all. All right, then, if I've got to. Not that I've got anything better to do, after all. It's amazing we ever get any work done down here. So she went to Mr. Dawson's room. Sitting in his chair was an angel. Hi, said the angel, smiling beatifically. I'm sorry I'm not here to deal with your concerns right now, but I'll be back again before you know it, and everything will be fine. Then she vanished in a cloud of sparkles. Nuts, Gina thought, and went to see Mr. Sunshine, who, needless to say, wasn't in his office, and the view from the window was a narrow courtyard filled with overflowing dustbins. Gina said a rude word, looked in the drawer for Harmondsworth, who wasn't there, then decided to think instead of just doing stuff. Knowing Mr. Sunshine as she did, where would she look for him? Ah, yes. It's a rule of office life that the smallest rooms attract the most people. The cashier's room was the smallest regularly used space in the building. It therefore contained, when she opened the door, Jenny Swordfish, behind the desk, stapling yellow slips to pink carbons, Tawny Bateman sitting on the edge of the desk drinking coffee, and Mr. Sunshine rummaging about in a box file beside the window. At the sight of Gina, Tawny flickered a little, as if his first instinct was to turn into something small and very fast. Then he solidified and gave her a sheepish grin. She ignored him. Ted? Mr. Sunshine didn't look up.
With you in a minute. Talk to Jenny or something.
Tawny Bateman slid off the desk, eased past Gina and left the room. What about?
I don't know, do I?
Gina breathed out through her nose. Lovely weather we've been having, she said. Have we? Said Jenny. Depends on what you like, I suppose. Look, Ted, there's something I need to ask you about. Are you going to be long?
Probably no more than 6 feet 1 inch.
Jenny shot her a he's in one of his moods look. It's the partnership accounts, she whispered, dipping her head in the general direction of the box file. I told him he's not supposed to look at them, but he can look at them, Gina said firmly. But does he have to look at them right now?
Yes,
Mr. Sunshine said, not looking up. Gina sighed, then sat down on the desk. So, she said, as Jenny reached for another stack of pink carbons, what changes in Venezuelan foreign policy do you foresee as a result of the restructuring of the Chicago Commodities Exchange? Well, Jenny began to say, and then Mr. Sunshine closed the file with a loud click and put it back on the shelf.
Seen all I need to see, he announced briskly. Thanks ever so much. Sorry, Gina. What can I do for you?
Not now, Ted. Can't you see I'm having a conversation? Now then, presumably you feel as I do that further deregulation could only serve to overstimulate and already...
Sorry,
Ted said, in a tone that suggested he wasn't in the least.
Gina, can I talk to you? Outside.
Gina gave Jenny a dazzling smile. Later, she said, and stood up. She waited till the door had closed behind them, then said, Ted, sometimes you can be so...
He's letting me back in the partnership,
Mr. Sunshine said. Gina stopped dead in her tracks. Seriously? Mr. Sunshine nodded.
If I can get Dolly to forget about wrecking the earth. So I was looking at the last few years' accounts, and you wouldn't believe the way he's been ripping you all off. It's an absolute...
What makes him think she'll listen to you?
She's my sister. For a start, he's been siphoning money off into offshore accounts.
You're what?
Didn't I mention it? All right. Yes, she's my sister. Has been for yonks. Anyway, the first thing I'm going to do when my name's back on the letterhead is to insist on a thorough external audit, because I'm pretty damn certain we can get the little creep on false accounting.
Ted! She hadn't meant to shriek, but on reflection she didn't regret it. Stop drivelling and explain. Tiamat the Destroyer is your...
Yep, and Santa Claus is her ex-husband, but there's not a lot he can do, so it's down to me, apparently. There's not a lot I can do either, come to that, but that's beside the point. The deal I made with Tom was I'll get my partnership back if I try to persuade her. So I'll try. I'll probably fail, but I'll have tried. And then
the planet will be bits of floating shrapnel, and there won't be any more partnership. She paused to draw a breath. Really? Your sister? I didn't know you had...
There's a lot of things you don't know.
Ted paused, then went on.
By the same token, there's a hell of a lot of stuff you do know, and a lot of the stuff you do know, I don't, even though I know a lot of stuff. But there's also a lot of stuff you don't know, but I do. That's just the way it is.
He stopped talking for a moment and frowned.
Good point, he said. If the world really is destroyed, it sort of takes the shine off me being a partner again. On the other hand...
Ted, I'm not sure there is another hand. I think what we're looking at is a classic help me, Obi-Wan, you're my only hope situation. It's you or nothing.
Fuck,
said Mr. Sunshine succinctly.
Oh well, nothing like a really strong incentive to reduce you to a quivering mass of nervous insecurity. I'll just have to do my best, that's all.
Gina nodded encouragingly. After all, she said, she's your sister. Deep down that's got to mean something, surely.
Let me guess,
Mr. Sunshine said.
You're an only child. Not to worry. We'll get all this dolly nonsense sorted out in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. Then everything will be fine. You'll see.
Gina looked at him. It's good news about the partnership, she said. Just one thing, though.
What?
Well, Gina said, if Dolly's your sister and she's a goddess, what does that make you? Mr. Sunshine chewed his bottom lip for a moment.
Worried,
he replied.
Come on, let's go and think about what I'm going to say to her.
The Kuniyoshi-Friedman process, though reliable and reasonably cheap, isn't as popular among practitioners as you'd expect it to be. To a certain extent, this is because it involves a lot of technology. Banks of gleaming white boxes that bleep, and miles of red, green and blue electrodes, which doesn't really jive with the mystique which so many members of the profession seek to cultivate. It's a bit like pulling your rabbit out of your hat with a tractor beam, or removing the lady from the box a split second before you push in the log knives using a teleportation device. It works, and it's efficient, but somehow it doesn't really seem like proper magic. Somehow. And magic is what the punter is paying for. Or at least he thinks he is. Sometimes, though, it's precisely the impression you want to create, especially with the young generation of clients who don't really believe in magic, but who think that technology can do anything, pull rabbits from hats, saw women in half, or even store a megabyte of data for more than 5 minutes without corrupting it beyond hope of recovery. Lilith McGregor, Consuela decided, fell squarely into the latter category. Blinking lights and bits of wire screwed into her head would reassure her and give her a comfortable sense of things being under control. Besides, the alternative was demons, and Consuela felt about demons the way she felt about rats, only slightly more so. Erica had seen to the setup. She knew where all the bits of wire were supposed to go and how to calibrate the scanners and make the interface compatible with Portals 9.1 and all that nonsense, which suggested that she was a competent electrician, if nothing else, and Consuelo was happy to leave her to it. She spent a contented quarter of an hour catching up with her billing until reception called to let her know Lilith had arrived. This isn't like the other place, Lilith said, as Consuela escorted her across the atrium to the glass box elevator. Consuela smiled. No, she said, it isn't. Mind the step as you get out. It wasn't just the elevator that was made of glass. So were all the walls and all the floors, giving the visitor an impression of walking on air through a floating world uninhibited by gravity. To those in the trade, it was especially impressive because it was all real, at eye-watering expense, rather than conjured up by magic, costing no more than 2 minutes of a practitioner's time to mumble the appropriate spells. Rival firms tended to dismiss it all as a vulgar display of conspicuous expenditure, which of course it was, but they struggled to keep the hint of envy out of their voices as they did so. A real 40-foot-high fountain in the main reception area, for crying out loud, with real parakeets. However much did that cost? In which case, they must be doing very well indeed. Erica had set up all the gubbins in the small interview room on the 9th floor. Consuela pressed a button, genuine circuitry, incantation-free technology, and the walls went dark. There was also an electric light, which Consuela switched on. The current that fed it was generated by 100,000 captive goblins running around a treadmill in the basement, but nobody ever mentioned that. As far as the management was concerned, it was real electricity, and that was all that mattered. Have a seat, Consuela said. I'll be with you in a moment. She hit the intercom. Erica, are we ready to go? Yes. She lowered her voice. What do I do? Well, first you recalibrate the induction RAM feeder matrix to the subject's neuroelectrical impulse ratio. Get in here. Coming. Now then, Consuela said, putting on her big smile. We've got a couple of minutes before my assistant arrives, so I'll just run through what we're going to do. I link you up to the big machine over there. Gosh, said Lilith, looking at it. Isn't that a Hewlett-Packard XB9000 solid-state Veteran resynthesizer? With a Kawakachian N7701 expansion chamber slaved to the reverse parallel cyclotron? Yes, said Consuela, helplessly. Naturally. Anyway, you put on these headphones, but how did you overcome the problem of parataxic feedback through the correlative interstatic jumpers? Consuela beamed at her. That would be telling. Anyhow, you put the earphones on, we plug in all the little bits of spaghetti, and hey presto, there you are in interdimensional paraspace. Then all I have to do is issue the challenge. The what? Oh, just a technicality. Then your mum shows up, and you two can have a nice chat. That's all there is to it, really. Then, when we're done, we can go to lunch. Lilith took a deep breath. All right, then. Shouldn't you be pre-charging the antipositron resonators? Not with this model, Consuela said firmly. It does it all for you. But surely... At which moment the door opened and Erica came in. Consuela rounded on her. You did remember to pre-charge the antipositron resonators, yes, Erica said, pointing to a glowing red light. It's all ready when you are. Right. Let's get cracking. Erica flipped some switches and pressed some buttons, and the whole room glowed blue. A ball of green fire burst out of the top of one of the white boxes and hovered in mid-air about 6 inches from the tip of Consuela's nose, hissing like a snake. Consuela edged away very slowly, trying to look as though this sort of thing happened every day. Erica didn't seem to have noticed it. Contact established, she said, sounding bored. Challenge issued, standing by. The ball of fire trebled in size, wobbled and began to drip like burning plastic. The flaming drips pooled on the floor and quickly built up into a column like a stalactite speeded up. Not just a column, a woman taking shape from the feet up. Challenge accepted, Erica sang out as the shoulders formed, then the head. Challenger requires you to select your weapon of choice for combat to the death. Available options include swords, thunderbolts, nuclear warheads, comets, dark matter, and derogatory epithets. Choose your weapon or concede the fight. She paused. Now. Concede, Consuela said very quickly. I give in. Very sorry to have bothered you. The fiery woman, who now had a head and a face not entirely unfamiliar from the photographs, wasn't listening to her. She was gazing at Lilith. "You again," she said. "Now what?" Behind her, various pieces of equipment whirred into life, but she didn't seem aware of them. Consuela nodded to Erica, who moved quickly and quietly to a console and started pressing buttons. "Hi, Mum," Lilith said. The fiery woman stopped flickering and cooled into a more or less conventional human shape. She still glowed, and you could probably have toasted bread on her, but now she was recognisably the woman in the picture. "So that's it, is it?" she said. "You want me to spare the earth and not incinerate your little friends? Well, tough." "But, Mum," the woman sighed. "Sorry," she said, "but it's a matter of principle. I was going to spare this horrible little planet if someone unlocked me and let me out. But then I got to thinking about how nasty everyone's always been to me and how nobody lifted a finger to release me for all that time, so I decided to fry the lot of you and serve you bloody well right." She paused and scowled. "Of course, I might have known you'd side with him." "But, Mum," Lilith said, "if you blow up the earth, I'll get blown up too. That's so unfair." The woman sighed. "That's so typical," she said. "Always putting yourself first, not stopping to think about other people, even your own mother. No, it's just me, all the time. I suppose I should be used to it by now, but it still hurts." "Mum," all trace of pleading had vanished from Lilith's voice, "you can't possibly do this. It sucks. You're being totally unreasonable." "Me?" the woman snarled. "Unreasonable? Oh, I like that. I'm not the one who goes round locking people up in asteroids and casting them adrift in intergalactic space. I'm not the one." "No, but you don't seem fussed about blowing up whole planets." "Mum, that's horrible. How could you be so thoughtless? Think of all the baby elephants in Africa. And the people too," she added. "Billions of people. What harm did they ever do to you?" The woman breathed fire through her nose, melting the vinyl on the arm of Consuela's chair. "What good did they ever do me? Come to that, answer none. Besides, they're trespassing on my property. It's not your... They've got no right to be there. I didn't say they could come and breed all over my planet. Besides, if they don't want to fry, they can leave. I'm not stopping them." "Mum, they can't. They haven't got spaceships." The woman shrugged. "It's not my fault if they can't be bothered to help themselves. If they choose to spend trillions of dollars on stupid wars instead of space exploration, that's their lookout, not mine. I can't be held responsible for other people's irresponsibility." "Mum, don't pull faces. You'll stick like it. Look," the woman went on, "you think you're fond of them. They're your pets, but you aren't really." "Yes, I am. I love them." "Your fellow humans? Really?" "Yes." The woman giggled. "That's so sweet. All right, we'll try a little thought experiment. When was the last time they elected someone to public office who actually made things better for anybody?" Quite. Let's try another one. Name 3 multinational corporations who put the common good above making money." Too difficult. All right, then. Give me a human political philosophy that hasn't been responsible for the deaths of at least 1 million people." Fine. Let's try a really easy one. Name me 10 of your fellow human beings you actually genuinely like." Pause. "That still doesn't make it right, Mum." "Oh, for crying out loud." The woman made a show of counting to 10 under her breath. "Tell you what," she said. "I'll make you a new heaven and a new earth just as soon as the first heaven and the first earth have passed away, and there will be no more sea." She hesitated, frowned, then went on. "Unless you want some sea, of course. Personally, I can't stand the stuff, but you're welcome to have some if you like. Not to mention," she added coaxingly, "new people. Genuinely nice, kind, generous, well-meaning people with none of that free will nonsense, who'll do what they're told without arguing the toss all the damn time. Mum, here's the deal," the woman went on. "I've got a planet out back of the Antares cluster. I haven't been there for yonks, but I assume it's still there. I'll give it a makeover and you can have it." She smiled warmly. A disconcerting sight. "Then I'll make you some humans to play with, all your very own. You can be a queen or a goddess or whatever you like. It'll be fun. It's got to be better than living here with these..." She stopped and drew a deep breath. "People." Lilith's eyes had gone very wide. "My own planet?" "Absolutely." The woman's eyes glowed with cunning. "Yours to do with what you like. Green skies, grey seas, unspoiled taupe beaches, no pollution, a completely unfucked up environment." "I don't know. Or, the woman went on irresistibly, I could make it post-industrial with a dangerously high CO2 levels, and you could save it. You'd enjoy that. But, Mum, you'd be its redeemer, the woman said. You could ban all the cars and close down all the coal mines and have all the electric kettles lined up against the wall and shot. You could take it right back to the Stone Age if you wanted to, and everybody would be so grateful. Just say the word and I'll see to it. Anything you want. It sounds nice, Lilith said doubtfully. But if you make all the problems on purpose just so I can fix them, much better than having problems that just arise randomly, I always say. But think of all the good you could do. I could make you a whole bunch of criminally unethical international corporations to regulate, or thousands and thousands of nasty rich people to tax, and millions of starving desperate peasants to give all the money to. Or, if you're very good, I could let you have a shitload of endangered species to save from extinction. Cuddly ones, not spiders or any of that crap. Now, what could be nicer than that? But it wouldn't be real, Lilith said. It'd be bullshit, the woman said abruptly. It'd be as real as anything. All right, as is. I'll make over the planet, whether you like it or not, and then give you the chance to save it. So if you don't, all those starving children and fluffy panda cubs will die. And it'll be all your fault. She beamed sweetly. How'd you like them apples? She said. But that's silly, Lilith said. In order to save the pandas on the planet, I'd have to abandon the ones on this one, and the people, she added, and the pandas on the other planet wouldn't have needed saving if you hadn't made them to be saved in the first place. So really, it'd just be making things worse. She paused and frowned. I think... Oh, for crying out loud, the woman said. Look, here I am bending over backwards to be nice, and you're just being totally unreasonable. If you want the stupid planet, you can have it. If not, you can stay here and get blatted like everybody else, and I'll reincarnate you to something marginally more sensible. Like a pebble. I don't want to sound insensitive, but I really do have other things on my mind apart from your ridiculous... Mum, that does it, the woman said. I'm a goddess and this is my planet, and I'll do with it what I choose, and I didn't come here to be lectured by a stupid little child. I've offered you everything you could possibly want, all the kingdoms of the new earth, and you've just been ungrateful and stubborn, and I've got no patience with that sort of thing. It's just being willful and showing off. It's worse than the old days. If you're the sort of human who's living here now, it's high time you all got blown to smithereens because you really deserve it. She was glowing an ominous red now, and several of the machines were beeping frantically. I'll give you one last chance. Are you coming with me, or would you rather stay here and fizzle into a crisp? It's entirely up to you. Never let it be said I ever tried to bully anybody into doing something they didn't want to do. No, Lilith said. Fine, the woman said. Screw you then. Lilith burst into tears, jumped up and ran out of the room. The woman turned her head and gave Consuela the benefit of 3 full seconds of her undiluted personality. Then she smiled. Somehow, she said, you seem to have got the impression that you are cleverer than me. Trust me, this is not the case. She waved her hand towards the bank of bleeping white boxes, which all went deadly quiet. In case you were wondering, yes, you were right. She blurred for a moment, and then there were 3 of her, as though Consuela had been drinking, and then there was just 1 again. And you can prove it too. All right then. Here's your reward. You'll write that paper for the technical journals, and it'll make you so famous they'll give you the oh-so-easy chop and blend chair of quantum metaphysics at Berkeley, 24 hours before I smash the planet into gravel. Have fun, she added, and don't say I never give you anything. Then she vanished as well, and all the lights came on full. There was a long silence. Then Erica stood up and switched off all the equipment. Reading's complete, she said. And you need to get all this stuff back to Robertson's by 4:30. Oh, and you know what? You can stuff your stupid job. I quit. Consuela barely registered what she'd said. It was all, she thought, so bitterly unfair. All she'd done was arrange things so that a mother and her daughter could get together and reconcile their differences, and in return she was going to get what she wanted most of in the whole wide world, one day before the whole wide world ceased to exist. So much worse than not getting it at all, and with death thrown in, and it's a sort of buy one, get one free. Death. Consuela had always prided herself on knowing exactly where she was going, and the hereafter most definitely wasn't on her itinerary. She didn't exactly know a great deal about death, where it was, what happened when you got there. How long it went on for. Did it hurt? Was it bad for you? That sort of thing. But that was a field of scholarly inquiry she had no interest in pursuing, not even if there were loads of research grants and rock-solid tenure. Her attitude was rather more along the lines of, get that thing the hell away from me, and most of the time she simply didn't think about it at all. But that crazy woman was going to kill her, which would ruin everything, unless... She went back to her office. Her coffee was stone cold. She was about to call down to Erica for another cup when she remembered that Erica wasn't there anymore. God damn it, why were people so horribly inconsiderate? Unless someone did something about it. She stopped and thought about that. Naturally, all along she'd been assuming that someone else would deal with the earth getting wasted problem while she got on with the serious business of securing her own future. That was what other people were there for, after all, to handle the day-to-day stuff, while the superior beings pursued happiness and achieved achievements. But now she'd met Tiamat the Destroyer and seen her in action. Did it seem reasonable to believe that a bunch of deadheads like Tom Dawson and, saints and ministers of grace defend us, her very own darling Brian, were going to be able to stop her doing whatever she damn well pleased? Answers on the back of a flying pig to the address in the Radio Times. In which case, unless she could hitch a lift off the planet with some passing life form who just happened to breathe oxygen, she was going to die. Quite soon. Her stomach churned and her knees felt like soggy pasta. Unless someone did something about it. The someone in question being me. For there is none other than fighteth for us, but only me. Oh, God. Pull yourself together, girl. It's all right. You can do this. No, said a little voice in the back of her head. You can't. She knew that voice quite well. She didn't like it much, mostly because it told her the truth. A commodity whose supply had a tendency to exceed demand. For a genuine free spirit, the very best the truth can ever be is a starting point, a fixer-upper in need of a great deal of tender, loving imagination. At its worst, like now, for example, it's a brick wall across the highway with barbed wire, searchlights and dogs. No, you can't. That lady, Tiamat, or whatever her names are, is one tough cookie. 3 tough cookies, and more than a match for little old Consuela. She'd have you for breakfast. Actually, she already has. In which case, Consuela decided, she needed to tell someone. The police? NATO? Starfleet? Get real. Mortals, 2-legged mayflies, hedgehogs beneath her chariot wheels. All right then, what about superior mortals? It so happened that she was sitting in a building crammed with them. There was Toby Porteous, head of pest control, who slew dragons and slaughtered werewolves. Becky Chang, director of perceptual and effective magic, who summoned up vast armies of mail-clad spectral warriors for the movies because it was cheaper than CGI. Emily Pendleton, who headed up the JWW necromancy team, who could raise countless hordes of the undead just as soon as the client's check had cleared the bank. Better still, Dennis Tanner, IC Mining and Minerals and hereditary king of the goblins. She considered them all, and in her mind's eye saw each of them in turn going squish under Tiamat's 2-inch Cuban heel. Human, all too human, the lot of them, no more use than a chocolate fire guard. In which case, there was only one thing for it. If she got caught, it went without saying she'd lose her job and never work in this business again. At any other time, that thought would have sent her courage scuttling down the nearest rabbit hole. But death made even that seem unimportant, and if she succeeded... She paused and thought about that. The woman who saved planet Earth, not a bad thing to have on her CV? She took a deep breath. This wasn't going to be easy. Deep in the vaults of 70 St Mary Axe is a strong room. Not the main strong room in daily use, but another one, whose very existence is one of the firm's most closely guarded secrets. Consuela only knew about it because of her uncanny ability to read memos upside down. Naturally the door was locked, and naturally the only key was on the CEO's keyring, and naturally the CEO wasn't likely to be in any hurry to part with it. probably because he was relying on what was inside the hidden strong room for making his own getaway from the planet shortly before 0 hour, and naturally it wasn't just any ordinary lock, vulnerable to skill, knowledge and a hairpin, and of course it went without saying that even if she did manage to get the door open, there'd be an alarm system the likes of which the world had never seen, and so on and so forth. She yawned, turned herself into a gnat, and flew off to find the keyhole.
The hell with it,
Mr. Sunshine thought, and jerked open his desk drawer.
Harmansworth, he said. My chariot.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Oh boy. The blue light inside the drawer flickered and ebbed. You haven't really thought this through, have you?
The chariot. Now.
It'll all end in
now.
The drawer slammed shut, nearly catching his finger. Outside the window, Leninsky Prospect with a view over the park, just for a change. The sky darkened and thunder growled ominously. Suddenly a twin fork of lightning slashed the sky like a razor.
Harmansworth, said Mr. Sunshine. Pack it in.
No more lightning, but it was dark as a bag out there, and the rain was hammering on the window pane. Mr. Sunshine sighed. Dark is his path on the wings of the storm sounds great in theory, but Mr. Sunshine had reached the point in his life where he no longer relished getting soaked in the rain. From another drawer he took a fold-away plastic Mac, unfolded it and put it on, drawing the hood over his head. The window blew open from the inside. Just beyond it, floating in the air, was the chariot. Mr. Sunshine regarded it with mixed emotions. Strictly speaking, it wasn't much to look at, because back in the early Bronze Age, if you wanted a wheeled vehicle of any description, you started with a tree and a not particularly sharp bronze axe, and you kept going until you had something that'd get the job done, more or less. It looked more like a hay cart than a chariot, plank floor and sides, 4 small solid wheels, a pole sticking out the front to which were harnessed 6 bored-looking donkeys. Viewed from the perspective of where he'd reached rather than where he'd come from, it looked like the sort of thing children go for rides in at the seaside. Once it had been the chariot of the sun. It hadn't changed, but times had.
What's that appalling smell? Mr. Sunshine asked.
I gave it a lick of creosote, Harmansworth informed him. Look, do you want it or not?
It hasn't changed. Times have. What about me?
Mr. Sunshine frowned.
I'm getting too old for this, Harmansworth, he said. I thought I told you to put in seat belts.
There aren't any seats. True. He was going to have to stand all the way, like travelling on the underground.
All right. Fit one.
Can't. Any significant structural alteration will upset the balance of the power-to-weight ratio, making it impossible to create a stable Verteron field, which would screw up the relativity dampers. You'd get there, but you wouldn't get then. You could end up anywhen, and then it'd be my fault, as usual.
Good point.
For various reasons, most of them valid, Mr. Sunshine had no great wish to revisit the past. As for the future, the classic definition of an immortal is someone who hasn't died yet. That was something Mr. Sunshine preferred not to think about.
Fine, he said. I'll just have to rough it then, won't I? But it'd be nice if just once.
He stopped. This was Harmansworth he was talking to.
Sorry.
That's perfectly all right.
I didn't mean to hurt your feelings.
Doesn't matter. It's only me.
If you really want to do some lightning.
Can I?
Go on. Just a little bit.
A flash, bright as arc welding, and a roll of thunder that made the floor shake.
All done.
Affirmative.
Jolly good.
Hugging his plastic Mac tight around his neck, Mr. Sunshine stepped through the window onto the cart. The donkeys took no notice of him.
Giddy up,
he yelled. One of them turned his head and looked at him.
Giddy up right now, you stupid animals, or your sausages,
he amended. The donkeys considered for a long moment, then arched their necks and plodded out into the wind and the rain, the cart following them, its wheels rumbling over nothing at all.
Engage quantum slipstream drive,
Mr. Sunshine ordered. Nothing happened.
Mush,
he cried, and for a split second the cart was 9 miles long, infinitely wide and half a micron thick, and then... There are some people who enjoy faster than light travel. Mr. Sunshine was no longer one of them. Possibly it was something to do with the fact that in the run-up to achieving escape velocity, his body was extended to infinite size before being stuffed into an infinitely small hole. No big deal when you're young, flexible and up for pretty much anything, but tiresome, verging on annoying for those of more mature years.
"Oh, for pity's sake,"
he muttered to himself as he was threaded through the eye of the galactic needle. And then it was all over for the time being, and he was outside. Outside of what? A very good question. All around him, stars zipped past like hailstones, and he crimped the collar of his plastic mac tight around his neck, as though there was a real danger that a stray star might get inside, like a wasp. Maybe that wasn't as silly as it sounded. Very few practitioners of FTL travel actually know what's going on or understand how it all works. Mr. Sunshine wasn't one of them. At least the cart seemed to be holding together, more or less. The sides were attached to the floor by copper nails, driven in at an angle and clented over. If you put your weight on them, they wobbled a bit, but the indescribable stresses of quantum dislocation didn't seem to be bothering them unduly. The 6 donkeys, meanwhile, were ambling along at, relativistically speaking, a slow walking pace, occasionally lowering their heads to see if there was anything edible growing on the floor of hyperspace, which there wasn't. But at heart, they were optimists. It occurred to Mr. Sunshine to wonder if they actually served any useful purpose, or whether they were only there for show. It was all, he decided, about faith. If there were donkeys, you believed that there was something pulling the cart, therefore it was capable of moving. No donkeys, no faith, no motion. Bronze Age science. A loud, sustained whimpering caught his attention, partly because there shouldn't be any sounds in the interstellar void. Harmondsworth? Unlikely. Harmondsworth was an Olympic-class whimperer when occasion demanded, but Mr. Sunshine knew his own familiar well enough to know when he was present, by the pricking of his thumbs as often as not. If not Harmondsworth, then who the hell was it? Mr. Sunshine sighed and reached inside his Mac for his wallet, from which he drew a small mirror. Properly speaking, he didn't need an imp-reflecting glass to see the true forms of concealed or enchanted objects, but using his inner eye in hyperspace tended to bring on one of his migraines.
"Oh," he said, "it's you. Serves you right."
A patch of creosote sucked itself up out of the grain of one of the planks that made up the floor of the cart and turned back into Tony Bateman.
"For fuck's sake," he mumbled. "What's happening to me?" "We're in hyperspace," Mr. Sunshine said, with a certain grim joy, "travelling at 307 times the speed of light, in a wooden cart pulled by donkeys. Can I drop you off somewhere, or shall I just throw you out into the slipstream?"
"Don't be like that," Tony whined, his eyes tight shut. "I didn't mean anything by it."
"Really?"
"Really," Tony assured him. "I was just looking for somewhere quiet where I could practice seeping. There's this job lined up where I've got to be a coat of plastic emulsion. So when that creepy psychic of yours took a can of creosote from the stores, I followed him and thought, why not?" Mr. Sunshine indicated the starscape with a broad gesture.
"This is why not," he said. "I thought Mr. Teasdale told you. No more shape-shifting unless you're actually on assignment."
"Practicing counts as active service, surely?" Tony gave him a spaniel look, then ducked as a star screamed by, apparently an inch from the top of his head. "Look, you won't tell Dawson about this, will you? Only, I need this job, and—"
"Yes, but does the job need you?"
Mr. Sunshine looked at him, then clicked his tongue.
"Creosote, for crying out loud," he said. "Actually, that's pretty impressive."
"I'm good at liquids," Tony said. "I make great margarita." Mr. Sunshine started to think why someone would want to turn himself into a cocktail, then made a conscious decision not to.
"What the hell?" he said. Throwing you off the cart would disrupt the hyperspatial displacement field and dump me back into real space, which would mean having to go through all that getting back up to speed nonsense again, and I really can't be bothered. I suggest you soak away back where you came from and keep your mouth shut until this is all over.
Sure, Tony said, then pulled a sad face. Balls, he said. Can't.
What?
It's his hyperspace stuff, Tony said sadly. I can't seem to, it's not working. Mr. Sunshine rolled his eyes.
You mean I'm stuck with you as you for the rest of the trip?
Looking that way.
Joy unbounded.
Mr. Sunshine sighed.
Just what I need. Excess baggage. Fine. At least try and make yourself useful.
Of course, Tony said, eager to please. What can I do? Mr. Sunshine thought for a moment.
I suppose I could use a charioteer, he said. I had one in the old days, on special occasions. Can you drive one of these things?
No. Mr. Sunshine shrugged.
Neither can I, but it never stopped me in the past. All right, grab hold of the reins.
The what?
These bits of leather tape,
Mr. Sunshine explained.
And don't make any sudden movements. Try and bear in mind that you're strictly symbolic, all right? Splendid. Make it so.
Silence for a while, as Tawny concentrated hard on not moving suddenly. Then he said, Where are we going exactly?
To see my sister, Mr. Sunshine said. She's horrible. You won't like her one bit.
Oh, come on. She's your sister. She can't be that bad. Mr. Sunshine scowled.
Why is that whenever I tell people how loathsome my relatives are, they won't believe me? I'm telling you, she's ghastly. She got the idea from somewhere that destroying inhabited planets is acceptable behaviour. That's why I'm going to see her, to try and talk her out of it. Not, he added, that it'll do any good. She has many skills, but listening isn't one of them.
Destroying planets?
Yup.
Mr. Sunshine pulled a sad face.
When she was a kid, it was pulling the wings off flies. Then when she was a bit older, she graduated from flies to angels, and since then she's got a lot worse. To be honest with you, I'm not looking forward to this.
He glanced up, studying the patterns of Dopplering stars.
Nearly there, he said. Now remember, don't say a word or move or breathe or anything. Just leave everything to me.
Tawny had gone a funny colour. Seriously, he said. Angels? Mr. Sunshine nodded.
And ministers of grace, he said, and pretty much anything else that didn't get out of the way quick enough. Right, if that's Cassiopeia, we need to hang a left.
The cart lurched, and one of the donkeys flicked its ears as they shot downwards through 90 degrees. Then all that dreary, infinitely big and infinitely small stuff, then a loud popping noise as they burst out of nowhere into real space.
Now then,
said Mr. Sunshine in a rather shaky voice.
If I did my sums right, and everything's gone exactly to plan, this should be the edge of the asteroid belt surrounding the third moon of Delta Leonis 6. If not, I have absolutely no idea where we are, and we'll probably end up having to walk home. Fingers crossed.
Tawny Bateman had never been on the edge of an asteroid belt before. Is that it?
You sound disappointed.
Well, it's just that, I was expecting. He shrugged. It looks different on TV, he said.
Different?
Better composition. This is just a big black thing with a few speckles. He frowned. It doesn't seem, meant, if you get my drift. I thought it'd be
tidier.
Tawny shrugged. Different.
Ah, well, that's the thing about reality,
Mr. Sunshine said gravely.
No class. Now it would help matters enormously if I actually knew what we were looking for. But unfortunately I don't. No. I tell a lie. We're looking for an asteroid.
He paused while he counted.
I make it 76,457 asteroids, he said. How about you?
Sorry, Mr. Sunshine nodded.
Of course, he said. You ran out of fingers. Mind you, there's no guarantee that Dolly's asteroid is one of this lot. I only chose this asteroid belt because she was rather fond of it when we were kids. Hang on, no. What's that?
Tawny Bateman followed the line of Mr. Sunshine's extended finger. A very large, hovering rock, he didn't say.
Take us in, Mr. Sunshine said. I want a closer look.
Sure. How do I do that exactly? Mr. Sunshine grabbed the reins and gave them a little flick, which the donkeys completely ignored.
Please,
he added. The donkeys ambled forward, swishing their tails.
Like that,
he said.
Now then, let the dog see the rabbit.
Rabbit? Queried Tony Bateman, but Mr. Sunshine wasn't listening. All his attention was fixed on the nearest asteroid, and as the donkeys lumbered closer, Tawny could see why. It was different somehow. It was smoother than the others and rather more symmetrical. Its surface gleamed slightly, whereas the others were dull matte. And it was pink. That's no rabbit, Tony observed.
No.
Was it a funny colour? Mr. Sunshine didn't answer. Pink could suggest the presence of a higher-than-average percentage of cinderitanium in the asteroid's core matrix, presumably the result of a quantum reflux in the final nanoseconds of the Big Bang. But Mr. Sunshine didn't think so.
Activate the long-range sensors,
he said quietly. Excuse me. Mr. Sunshine sighed and reached for a pair of binoculars hanging from a copper nail driven into the side of the cart.
That's Dolly's asteroid, all right, he said. Look.
He passed the binoculars to Tawny, who peered through them. What am I looking for? He said.
About 8 o'clock on the outer edge.
Ah,
precisely.
Tawny handed the binoculars back to Mr. Sunshine. Why don't they just drift away into space? He asked.
Probably trapped there by the asteroid's gravitational field.
That's a lot of empty Prosecco bottles.
That's Dolly for you.
Right, Tony said. So, we found the right asteroid. What next?
Good question.
Mr. Sunshine frowned.
To be honest with you, I haven't really thought this through. I mean, we can land. Probably we can land, he added. But I'm not sure how much good that'll do us.
Really? Mr. Sunshine nodded.
For a start, he said, the chariot's life support system only operates inside the vehicle's spatiodynamic footprint, which means that if we get off it, you won't be able to breathe. Not that it matters, because you'd freeze to death pretty well instantaneously anyway. I'll be all right, but I'd still have the problem of getting inside that thing. If there's a door, I can't see it. Besides, it's locked, and I don't have the key.
Ah,
I'm guessing, Mr. Sunshine went on, that there's a window, or a garbage chute, or something like that. Or else how can Dolly throw out all her empty wine bottles? So presumably I could yell to her down the chute, and she could yell back, if she's talking to me, which I seriously doubt. Of course she hasn't seen me for something in the order of 3,000 years, so maybe she'll be prepared to talk, if only to tell me things about myself. Or maybe not. I just don't know. In which case, we've wasted our time coming here, in a strictly non-relativistic sense, of course.
Fine. Tony paused for a moment. Maybe we should just give up and go home.
Not a bad idea, Mr. Sunshine said. Would that it were possible. Unfortunately, I don't think we've got enough fuel for that.
Fuel?
Carrots,
Mr. Sunshine said.
Oats, hay, that sort of thing. I don't think my original idea was to sponge some donkey fodder off Dolly after we had our little chat and made friends again. Always assuming she's got something like that in there. Mind you, the donkeys aren't fussy. They'll eat practically anything. Shoes, straw hats, prawn mayonnaise sandwiches.
You mean, Tony said, we can't get home?
Mr. Sunshine shrugged. I could walk, he said, but it would take me 11 million years. As for you, he sighed, let's hope I can find a way of talking to Dolly, and she's in one of her better moods.
What are the chances of that?
Slim, Mr. Sunshine said, but what the heck? Giddy up, you stupid animals, please.
The chariot lurched forward. Tawny borrowed the binoculars and searched for anything that might be a door, window or hatch. "Hey," he said, "I found something."
"Jolly good,"
Mr. Sunshine said.
"What?"
"It's a sort of hatch," Tony said. "Definitely a hatch. It's sliding open."
"Right,"
Mr. Sunshine said.
"that could be a good sign."
"You bet," Tony said. "It's quarter open. Now it's half. It's completely open. Something's coming out."
"Ah."
"It's sort of silvery," Tony said. "Shaped a bit like a frankfurter, with fins on the end. I'd say how big it is at this range, but probably quite big. It's come all the way out. It's turning. It's turning towards us."
"Rats,"
said Mr. Sunshine.
"Raise shields."
"Sorry?" Mr. Sunshine reached past him and grabbed a wicker screen, about 3 feet square, with a hand grip in the middle. Back in the day, it offered a modicum of protection against arrows, javelins, and slingshots, at extreme range. Whether it'd be any good against a quantum torpedo with a matter-antimatter total annihilation warhead remained to be seen. He handed it to Tawny. "No point having a dog and barking yourself."
"Go on then,"
he said.
"Raise it."
"Like this?"
"Higher, a tad more to the left. No, your left. That's the ticket. Now we'll see if we'll make a blind bit of..."
The security division of JWW would have you believe they're the hardest, meanest, badass mothers on the planet, and they'll send you a glossy brochure to prove it on the slightest provocation. It says a great deal about their track record that when JWW senior management decided to construct a really safe place in which to store their most valued possession, they hired Zauberwerk AG to design and install it. Partly it was a case of, if you want a job done properly, get someone else to do it. Partly it was the thought of one of their own knowing all the flaws, wrinkles and weak spots in the system. Mostly, though, Zauberwerk were cheaper than having it done in-house. The gnat perching on the handle of the strong room door didn't know that, of course. All she knew was that there was no keyhole, likewise no gap under or above the door to crawl through. More to the point, there was no door, just a door handle sticking out the wall. She sighed. Magic, how quaint. Since there was no point being a gnat any more, she turned back into Consuela Teasdale and sat on the floor with her back to the opposite wall, feeling angry. Stupid, she decided. It was just plain stupid that at this extremely important point she should run up against something she had to stop and think about. Magic, for crying out loud. Now then, she thought, I can do this. When it's a door, not a door. When it's a wall. Whoever designed this thing would almost certainly have started from that obvious premise. If you want to keep people out of a specified area, the best way to go about it is to make sure there's no means of access. Musashi, the greatest swordsman who ever lived, decreed that the very best way to win a fight is not to fight. By the same token, the best way to secure a door is not to have one. Instead, have a wall. And when is a wall not a wall? When it's a door. Security, they say in the business, is a perfectible science. It's the customers who ruin everything. The perfect strong room doesn't have a door. It has a wall instead, but annoying customers want to be able to get in and out. Therefore, the wall has to be, under certain highly circumscribed conditions, a door. They'd covered all this, of course, in second year. 99 times out of 100, she'd been taught, the easiest and best way to deal with doors that turn out to be walls is to treat them as walls and smash holes in them. This can be done quickly and efficiently with a wide selection of demolition spells, high explosives, or a steel ball and a chain. If you're reluctant to make a noise and a mess, don't be. There are plenty of ways to deaden sound, repair structural damage, and sweep up dust and bits of plaster without resorting to a dustpan and brush. Only in very exceptional circumstances, such as level 9 anti-intruder curse, or when you're being paid by the hour, should you consider trying to pick the lock of a wall. It's more trouble than it's worth. Honestly. Consuela considered the wall. She got up and tapped it with her knuckle. She put her ear to it and listened. Then she opened her Loganberry and called up the floor plans of 70 St. Mary Axe. The strong room wasn't on the plans, obviously. Magic, she said to herself. I hate magic. In which case, screw magic. Let's approach this scientifically. Solid objects, such as walls, can be easily penetrated by small packets of electromagnetic energy emanating from the electron cloud of an ordinary everyday atom. With her fingernail, she picked a molecule from her scalp and rolled it between her fingertips until it broke down into its constituent atoms, the way she'd been taught in first year. She peered at the atom until she could make out the electron cloud, a sort of greasy smudge, like olive oil on the meniscus of a washing-up bowl. She looked at the cloud until the cloud looked at her. "Hi," she said, feeling energetic. The electron cloud had probably heard that 1,000,000 times over. It gave her a "what is it now" look. "Thanks," she said. "That's fine. You can go now." It's much easier to turn yourself into something if you know what you're turning yourself into. She'd never been an X-ray before, but actually it was no big deal. She considered the wall. It wasn't quite as solid as it had been a moment ago. In fact, it was nothing but a floating cloud of soft goo. "Geronimo," she muttered under her breath, and charged. X-rays don't have heads, which is probably just as well. No head, no concussion when you slam into a solid object at high speed. She opened her eyes. She was human again, lying on the floor about 18 inches from the wall. Unlike an X-ray, she had a head. It hurt. "Like that, is it?" she thought. "Fine." In third year, you could do demolition, including thunderbolts, artificially induced earthquakes, and incantations of mass destruction. Or you could do history of metaphysics, which was 2 lectures a week and more practical. Consuela had opted for history of metaphysics. Very little of what she'd learned stayed with her, but she remembered how Dorokov discovered the principle of specific inherent latency. He'd done it by conjuring an intensive somewhere-else field inside the spectrogram of heavily localized quantum peculiarity, blowing himself to smithereens in the process. "What exactly is a smithereen?" she asked herself, as she whipped up a somewhere-else field using her phone, a pencil sharpener, and her left contact lens as a makeshift omnidirectional condenser. Not that it mattered. In 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, the wall would be lots of them. But that was all right, because a temporal pancake flip and a high-powered status inverter would scoop them all up and put them back exactly where they'd been, with her on the other side, just as soon as she'd finished inducing the peculiarity, which was a piece of cake, provided you remember that effect has to precede cause in order to achieve destructive force, hence the handy jingle, E after C except before D. She slid the pencil sharpener under her phone and trained the contact lens on it, counted to 4 and turned herself into a diamond to withstand the impact of the blast. Nothing happened. Later, she figured it out. Whoever built the wall had saturated it with multiple inherent contradictions, which absorbed the violent expansion of the peculiarity and vented the force of the explosion resulting from the mutual annihilation of the possible and the impossible into the outer metasphere, where they would ultimately reassemble and congeal as a series of marginally toxic half-truths. That would explain the dizziness, the faint smell of newly baked bread, and the barely perceptible warm spot on the wall, just below the stupid door handle. She stopped being a diamond, stood up and stamped her foot. "Not fair," she screamed to herself, as it gradually dawned on her that whoever built the stupid strong room might just possibly be smarter than she was, which wasn't right, on a fundamental level. She gave the wall a savage kick, proving in the process that the wall was also harder than her toe. A man came round the corner and walked towards her, reading something. He looked up as he passed her, and she vaguely recognised him. Mr. something or another. He'd been pointed out to her at some nebulous office function. "Anything the matter?" he asked. It occurred to her that there are more ways of killing a cat than chopping it in half with a cleaver. "Sorry," she said. "I'm new here." The man, who was middle-aged, thin on top and thicker round about, gave her an encouraging smile. "It's a bit of a maze until you get used to it," he said. "Where are you looking for?" The thing he'd been reading, she saw, was a memo from somebody or other to Derek Goldman. She knew who he was, head of the Inhuman Resources team, very senior management indeed. The strong room, she said. Mr. Suslovich wanted me to fetch something for him.
Strong room's down the stairs, on your left.
Not that strong room, the other one.
Ah, right.
Mr. Goldman grinned.
And Kaz Suslovich forgot to give you the access code.
Do you need an access code? Sorry, I didn't know.
Oh, yes.
The grin became a smirk.
That's Kaz all over. Don't tell him I said so. He'd forget his own head if it wasn't stuck on. Here, let me do it.
He placed one hand on the wall and covered it with the other.
I'm not supposed to see, he explained, terribly hush-hush.
A door, Georgian-style panels, instantly materialised around the handle, which Mr. Goldman turned. The door swung open.
There you go, he said. Make sure you pull it shut after you leave.
It doesn't do, according to all the latest self-help books, to live in the past, and Gina Noctis agreed, more or less. True, the past was her registered domicile for tax purposes, but that's not the same as living there. Just as Orinoco.com doesn't actually have its main offices in a tiny volcanic atoll in the middle of the Pacific. It had been fun being a Queen of the Night while it lasted, and she didn't regret a minute of it. But times had changed, and so had she. And she was perfectly happy with who she was now, and reasonably confident about who she was going to be in the future. The power, the glory, the abject terror she'd inspired in everybody across whom her shadow fell. Yes, but she'd been there, and done that, and moved on. Mostly, what she was doing now was so much more interesting. It was different, though, for other people. She acknowledged that. Some people hadn't had the same advantages as she'd had. They'd never commanded shadow legions or led the wild hunt. They'd never known what it's like to sit enthroned in darkness, where you can be whatever you want to be because nobody can see what you truly are. Now that was true freedom. Gina had cheerfully traded it, after she'd had all the fun that she could possibly get out of it, for light and certainty in the company of other sentient beings. She'd been in a position to make an informed decision, and she decided it was time for a change. But other people, Tom Dawson for example, Tom hadn't been spontaneously generated by the friction of time. He hadn't sprung fully armed from the universal omnimatrix while the first shockwaves of the Big Bang were still racing towards the curved walls of infinity. He'd been born and brought up in Slough. You can forgive a man a great deal once you know something like that about him. You've got to make allowances, was Gina's motto, and she tried her best to live by it. Even so, she knew all about Mr. Ahriman, of course, and that made a big difference. Tom Dawson wasn't a fundamentally bad person. He was a perfectly ordinary person who'd made an unfortunate business decision and was having difficulties living with the fallout. By the same token, the Black Death was just a bunch of normal, well-adjusted microbes doing what normal, well-adjusted microbes do. The circumstances aren't the fault of their victim. Society is to blame. Some things, however, were beyond even Gina's capacity to forgive, and the memo that appeared on her desk was one of them. From T. Dawson to all partners and staff.
It has come to my attention that members of staff have been using the firm's crystal skull to predict winning lottery numbers. The skull is a very expensive piece of precision equipment which the firm cannot afford to replace, and use of it by untrained and unauthorized personnel invalidates our insurance. This practice will now cease with immediate effect.
Of all the pompous, small-minded, not that Gina had ever done anything like that herself, if she ever wanted to win a lottery, all she'd need to do would be to choose numbers, and of course they'd win, if they knew what was good for them. But treating grown-ups like naughty kids wasn't the way to run a civilised business. She screwed the memo into a ball, consumed it instantaneously with acetinic fire, and went to have a word with Tom Dawson. He wasn't in his office. Instead, that stupid angel was sitting at his desk, preening her wing feathers with a tiny gold comb. "Hi," she said, with the same toothpaste-ad smile as before. "I'm sorry I'm not here to deal with your concerns right now." "Shut it," Gina said. "Where is he?" The angel was, of course, simply a projection, insubstantial and not actually there. But Gina wasn't in the mood to be baffled by technicalities. "Sorry," said the angel. "I don't... Oh my God, I exist. That's so amazing. I can think, so presumably I am. That's so incredibly cool. Did you do that?" "Yes," Gina said. "Where is he?" "You turned me from a holographic recording into a real-life person. Just like that. That's got to be the most brilliant thing ever. How did you..." Gina took a long step forward, grabbed the angel's ear, and twisted it. "Ow," said the angel. "That hurts." "Yes," Gina said. "Welcome to existence. Where's Tom Dawson?" "He had to go out," the angel whimpered. "Meanwhile, if you'd care to leave a message..." "Where did he go?" "Unavailable data. Please don't do that. I don't like it." "I'll give you unavailable data," Gina said. "Replay the moment of his departure. Start." "Can I do that?" "If I say you can, you can." "Okay, but would you please leave off twisting my ear? Thank you." The angel sat upright, shot Gina a hurt look and closed her eyes. "Replaying moment," she said. Two translucent forms flickered into view. One of them was Tom Dawson, with his back to the office wall. The other was Mr. Ahriman. "Play sound," Gina snapped. "Audio not available." Mr. Ahriman was advancing slowly with a grin on his shimmering see-through face. Tom had backed away as far as he could go. The Queen of the Night can do many things. Lip-reading, curiously enough, isn't one of them. "Extrapolate audio from all available records," Gina commanded. The angel gave her a look. "Hey," she said, "just who do you think I am? Tennessee Williams?" But there wasn't any need of audio. The look on Tom Dawson's face told Gina all she needed to know, and if she needed confirmation, Mr. Ahriman provided it by grabbing Tom by the throat, lifting him off his feet and stuffing him to his jacket pocket. "End playback," the angel said. That's when he left. The image of Mr. Ahriman melted away in a shower of red sparkles. Gina stood for a moment staring at where it had been, then shook herself back into life. "He took him." "Looks like it," the angel said. "I guess him leaving triggered my program, and here I am." "Hey, does that mean I'm now a real person with thoughts and feelings and fundamental human..." "Go away," Gina said, and the angel vanished. "Nuts," thought Gina. "It had to happen, of course, sooner or later." Eventually, the cat gets tired of playing with the wounded field mouse. The lure of its calorific content exceeds its play value, and down the hatch it goes. She could see where Mr. Ahriman was coming from. The world was about to be destroyed. Tom Dawson would be destroyed with it, and if he was reduced to his component atoms, he'd be no fun to torment any more. Gobble him down now, therefore, while there was still time. Heaven, or wherever it was that Mr. Ahriman came from, forbid that Tom should in any sense escape the consequences of his ill-advised actions through the fortuitous intervention of a speeding asteroid. Even so, Gina thought, that's a bit rough. Tom Dawson had borrowed stake money from Mr. Ahriman to buy his way into the partnership, which he'd then taken over by guile, treachery, and inhumanly brutal use of elbows. All he'd wanted was to make something of himself, to succeed. A pity he'd had to ruin everything in the process, but you couldn't blame him for aspiring, just you can't blame a tree for growing out of a tiny seed. If the seed happens to fall into a crack in a wall, that's not its fault. Tom was simply a normal, well-adjusted human being doing what normal, well-adjusted human beings unfortunately tend to do. It wasn't fair that he should be punished for it. Gina considered that, and various related issues, then sighed. It wasn't just Tom Dawson's presumable future as a soul in eternal torment, it was also the fact that Mr. Ahriman could still be a partner in the firm. Indeed, given that he just foreclosed on Tom's share of the business, Mr. Ahriman would be the senior partner, and therefore by implication the boss of her. Now that, Gina told herself, could easily be downright tiresome. More nuts, she thought, bushels and bushels of the stupid things. She let her mind dwell for a moment on the concept of partnership and the unavoidable fact that it's people we share with who annoy us the most. Tom Dawson might be a devious, ruthless, razor-tongued arsehole with the Dark Age sensibilities and about as much fun to be around as Plutonian Brick, but, well, you get used to people, and contempt isn't the only thing that familiarity breeds. Life without Tom would be like beer without hops, in which case the only thing for it was to rescue the bastard. She imagined the look on Ted Sunshine's face when she suggested the idea to him, then dismissed the thought from her mind before it broke anything. Pity. She needed allies, and for all his many faults, Ted was right up at the top of her list of people she'd want with her in a fight. But she had to be realistic, which meant Ted was out of the reckoning, which just left Brian Teasdale. A nice enough boy and pretty smart for a mortal, and if that wasn't damning with a faint praise, she didn't know what was. Still, Brian could be relied on to do as he was told, so long as he was told in the right way. The only motivation he'd need was the thought of Mr. Ahriman taking the chair at partnership meetings. Once that had been pointed out to him, the rest would be easy. She found him in his office, turning water into wine by remote transmutation for a major multinational distillery. "With you in a tick," he said, not looking up from the golden bowl he was staring into. "I've just got to the tricky bit." The tricky bit, in context, meant shearing the molecular bonds in 3.345 times 10 to the power of 60 molecules of water simultaneously by sheer force of will. So she decided to wait. It didn't take him long, bless him. "Sorry about that," he said, looking up from the bowl, the contents of which were now a dark burgundy. "Now, what can I do for you?" "It's Tom," she said. "Ahriman's got him." The bowl slipped between Mr. Teasdale's knees and hit the floor. "You what?" "Stuffed him in his pocket and vanished in a cloud of sparks," Gina said. "I'm guessing he decided to foreclose and Tom didn't have the money. Anyhow, he's gone." "Fuck us, though," Mr. Teasdale said with feeling. "That means Ahriman." "Yes," Gina said, "unless we do something." "Such as?" "Get Tom back." Mr. Teasdale gave her a very sad look. "Gina." "Yes, I know. Trouble is, life isn't all beer and skittles. Sometimes you've got to bite the bullet and do nasty things." "Not," Mr. Teasdale pointed out, "when they're physically and metaphysically impossible. That's Ahriman you're talking about, the Prince of—" Gina frowned, warning Mr. Teasdale of the fragility of the ice he was about to plant his boot on. "I know perfectly well what he's the Prince of, Brian, and that's a nuisance, but it can't be helped. We owe a duty to a colleague in distress." "Balls," Mr. Teasdale said succinctly. "It can't be done, and if you think I'm going to sit on my arse on a lemon squeezer for Tom bloody Dawson, you must be—" "Brian," Gina said. "Shut up. There's a good boy." Mr. Teasdale gazed at her as though she just hit him with a stick. "Oh, come on, Gina," he said, and then the muscles of his neck slackened and his shoulders drooped. "Fine," he said. "How exactly?" "Good question." Thank you so much for listening to this chapter all the way through. If you've got this far, I know they're a bit of a long haul. Trust me, they are to read as well as to listen. But thank you so much for supporting the channel. It's very much appreciated. If you can just hit the notifications bell, subscribe if you don't subscribe, share if you want to share. As I said the last time, I mentioned a prehistoric bird incorrectly on purpose in the last chapter. If you know which one it was, if you would like to DM me via my increased Instagram, and I may have a prize. Yes. Anyway, thank you very, very much for listening. I hope you enjoy your Boxing Day, or whichever day it is that you're listening to this on. And chapter 5, 6, my goodness. The next chapter will be Cupid, and that'll be coming in a couple of days. So that'll be the 28th of December. Thanks for listening. Big love. Stay safe.